Hi, my name is Etta Grace, and welcome to my YouTube channel. I am so delighted today to have Amanda Auler on. She wrote Daughter of the Sun, and last month I put up a review of this book, and I really enjoyed it. I'm very excited for the sequel, Children of the Earth, and so I brought her on today to talk. So welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Etta.
So first, if you want to tell me a little bit about yourself, how long you've been writing, and what it is that you write.
Sure. Well, my name is Amanda. I am a wife and a mother to three boys, and I have been writing since I was a kid. I mean, I was like 6 years old. I think I started like making stories, but it wasn't until after I became a mom that I was like, oh, I actually want to make this something, and I actually need to get back to some creativity in my life, and started writing Daughter of the Sun back in 2017. Wow. And worked on that on and off for 5 years until I published it.
That's great. I can relate to working on a book for a really long time. My first book took me 6 years to finish. So
Yeah.
that's very admirable that you're able to keep pushing through it. I know it's extremely busy being a mom and trying to run a household as well as like carve out creative time for yourself. I have four younger siblings, which I know isn't the same, but having kids in the house always keeps it crazy. So
Yes. You understand the noise, I'm sure.
yeah, good for you. So Daughter of the Sun is set in a world called Mothmar, right? And so all of your books in this trilogy are part of the same world. So what was the inspiration for Mothmar?
Yeah, so actually watching a movie with my husband called Mad Max Fury Road, which if you've seen it, it's the opposite of Mothfire. It's all sand and dry, there's no water. But I just liked the idea where everyone had to like really adapt to their atmosphere and adapt to their world. And so everyone was kind of wearing like scarves and stuff to cover their faces to protect themselves from the elements. And I just liked that idea that there was some extreme elemental thing happening. And then I started asking myself, well, why is it happening? Why is the weather so extreme? And that's kind of how the ice age of Mothmar was born.
That's really cool. I just finished reading Dune recently, and there's all of
Oh, there you
the
go.
water
Yeah.
politics with like the still suits and like making sure that you don't lose any water to the atmosphere because it's so dry. So seeing the exact opposite of that as like a cold blizzard world was really cool for me. And it gives it a really epic scope of proportions because we think about the ice age and we think about the ancients and the gods and monsters and roaming the earth, and it's just really cool world to explore, especially through the lens of your two POV characters.
Yeah.
So
Thanks.
the start of the book is the prologue where we hear about a prophecy and a chosen one and the way that these prophecies are taken. And you have a really interesting twist on this trope where the prophecy is like only half true. We see in the prologue the kid that's supposed to be transcribing it messes up and he doesn't get all the words right. And so I was wondering how you approached writing that, balancing the interpretation of the prophecy with what you know behind the scenes is actually supposed to be happening, and turning this trope on its head.
Yeah. So what's funny is I had this idea for this boy who completely messes up the prophecy and a system that is relying heavily on these young children to write down like these things only because the adults would never want to spend their whole lives up on a mountain. So why not have the kids do it? And they're young enough that they're not going to change anything because they're not old enough to try to like be mischievous and like swing politics their way, and instead, we just get kids who make mistakes like, spill tea on their scrolls and stay up all day when they're supposed to be sleeping. And yeah, so it's funny because when I wrote that, I gave myself a lot of wiggle room because my intent was that I'm kind of a plantser, right? Like I do outline my books, but then I just let my writing take me where it's going to go. There are so many scenes that happen that I was like, didn't expect this to happen. I just kept going. And so it's funny when I was writing now my second book, I got to this point where I was like, I have to know the actual prophecy, and I didn't know it. I hadn't written it down. I was talking to my friend Mariah about it. She was like, you didn't figure out the actual prophecy? I was like, no. She was like, that's so dumb. Why didn't you figure that out first? Like, I don't know. That's not how I work. So thankfully, with the help of some of my friends and like talking to my husband, like I just kind of like slowly piece together what the prophecy was actually supposed to say. And some of it's super nuanced and other parts of it are like very much obvious. So eventually the reader will see what the actual prophecy is.
That's very intriguing because I am a plotter all the way, and so the first thing I do is like figure out the ending. But
Yeah.
a lot of the time I have to go back to my writer friends and I'm like, I somehow plotted myself into a corner. I've got too much stuff
Mm.
here. How do I tie it all together? Like sticky note outlines on the wall. So that's
Oh,
really
wow.
cool that your writing friends were able to help you like pull it all together in the end. I'm very excited to see where this is going.
Yeah, and I realized I kind of gave a really big spoiler there, which I'm fine with releasing that the reader will eventually hear that correct prophecy. So,
Yeah, feel free to
yeah.
answer these questions with as much or as little
Yeah.
spoilers as you feel comfortable. I'm not trying to mine for spoilers here. As curious as I am, I'm whatever you're most comfortable with. So, I guess then my next question is, you have two POV characters in Daughter of the Sun. You have Soliana, who is giftless and is trying to find her place in the world, and you have Pala, who is um struggling also to find her place in the world, but in a very different kind of way. So, how did you handle writing these two very different POVs? Like their voices are so narratively separate, and balancing the pacing and plots of these two stories that are seemingly happening at the same time, but also like they're completely disconnected. And how did you balance that as you were writing to make sure that you weren't dropping one plot?
Well, actually, it took me. Okay, so Solyana is the character that I mostly resonate with, right? Like she was the kind of the me character that I was kind of pouring my own personality traits into and my own decision making into and things like that. Paula was the opposite. She was the person that like I could do the antithesis of everything that I am into Paula. Um, and funny enough, I found Paula a lot easier to write because of that, because I wasn't writing myself, I guess. Like it's kind of an intimate thing to write yourself into a character. And Solyana isn't entirely me. Don't look too far into that. But like there was just a lot of similarities that I was able to dredge up for her, but it made her so much harder to write that I found myself just wanting to write Paula to the point that when I got like 3 drafts in, I was reading my own book back to myself and thinking, oh my gosh, I hate Soliana. I just do not like her as a character. Why do I hate her so much? If I hate her, the readers are gonna hate her. And I don't want her to be hated. She's the hero, right? So I had to really figure out how to make her likable. And I think a big thing that helped me to keep them separate is their decisions were really key. So their storylines, if you read back, if when you're reading the book, you'll find kind of similar beats that are happening in their story. Because I wanted to set it up so that their stories were kind of paralleled, but
Mhm.
one continued to make choices for the betterment of everyone, and the other continued to make choices that were for just the betterment of her. Um, and so that I kind of use that as my guide of how to make sure that I kept one character a little bit more selfish than the other character. And I feel like their voice kind of came out of that.
That makes a lot of sense. I didn't really connect that at the time as I was reading it, but now that you say it, I definitely see that change between the two characters and certain things that
Mm-hmm.
they do, approaching like the gift ceremony. I'll ask about the gifts in just a second. But the gift ceremonies and like they both start like not being outsiders in their own world, but they find their place in different ways. And so I definitely think that's interesting seeing the parallels between the two of them. And I listened to the audiobook. You gave me a copy of the audiobook,
Yeah.
and the voice, I think it's just the one voice actor, but she has such completely different voices for the two characters just in hearing it that I'm like, is this two people reading at first? And it's really incredible to break it up like that. I read it in one day at work just because I
Yeah.
wanted to know
That's
what happened
amazing.
next. Yeah.
Oh man,
So
that's amazing.
that's my other question is how do you think Paula and Soliana would get along if they grew up together? Because they don't really interact throughout most of the book. So
Yeah. I like how you worded that. For the ones who've read it, they know. Yeah. I don't think they'd get along very well. I think Soliana would maybe try to like befriend her, and Paula would be like, go away. Yeah.
Paula has very much of like the loner vibe, either through intent or circumstance. But
Yeah.
Solana's such a nice person. So I was
Yeah.
curious if they would be friends. So um you are, now to talk about the gifts that I've mentioned a couple times, you are a Christian author, you mentioned that, and you have these three main deity figures in the story. The people worship the celestials, the sun, moon, and stars. And so I was wondering how you play with a fantasy religion that doesn't quite match your own, being monotheistic, and still honoring your own values through the storytelling with the world building and the gifts and the religion of the culture that you're writing.
Yeah, no, I thought this was such a great question when I read it and you sent them to me ahead of time. So I was like, man, yeah, like how do I talk about this without spoiling things? This is my biggest concern. Um,
All good.
so I think ultimately, um, I I I don't write Christian fantasy. So I don't necessarily want my books to exactly be an allegory to the Christian walk in terms of that, because I personally think that, like for me, I learn so much better through storytelling than I do through someone telling me exactly what to believe. Um, and so through storytelling and kind of this vague other religion that I've created in this book, I'm able to represent key truths from what I believe through this religion, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
Um, and so, in a sense, these celestials, the father of the day, the sun, the mother of the night, the moon, and the children of the sky, the stars, they all, to me, I've always kind of in my head made them God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit. Like I've kind of in my head made them my Trinity kind of thing, but they're
Yeah, that
all
makes sense.
celestials, right? Um, but I've always been kind of wary because it's kind of this fine line, I think, for Christian authors, especially, or any author that has a religion where they want it not, yeah, they want it to come through their books because that's something like I'm passionate about. I'm passionate about my faith and about Jesus. And so I want that to come through my work. And I think it's automatically going to, regardless of what I do, it's going to come out of my work. So I just think it would be the coolest thing if someone were to pick up my book and by the end of it be like, I think this author is a Christian. Like being able to see that just through reading this, I think what would be really neat for me. So yeah, it's kind of a balance, but I think it's also just like I'm having fun with it. Like I don't think I have to be super stick in the mud about like, oh no, I can't say this or it's not going to ring true to
Mhm.
Christianity. Like I don't know. I try to highlight a lot of the fact that there are gray areas and we have to have faith in the Lord to figure out and pray about like what we should do because there are just some areas that are gray. What do you do about those areas? So I think a lot of Children of the Earth, the second book, really hits on a lot of those points. So
Mhm. Yeah, I really like it whenever I'm able to read, like you said, read a book and be like, I think this author is a Christian. And a lot of my favorite bands and things are the same way. Like I listen to a lot of the Arcadian Wild and the Oh Hellos, where it's like they don't
mm,
necessarily market themselves as Christian band or Christian author or Christian book, but you can still tell just because of how it comes through and the values and what they choose to dwell on. Like family is really big in this book. Paula's
yeah.
relationship with her family isn't the greatest, and Soliana is very ride and die for her sisters, and it's
Mm,
very interesting to read about those contrasts. But because of the family focus, that was something that kind of clued me into, oh, this author might be Christian, because that's something that I focus a lot on in my work. Family is very important to
mhm,
me, and one of my books, Storge, means the Greek word for familial love and how that builds into
mm,
the religion and the culture. And um, how I grew up as a Christian is that, we're all a family and the
yeah.
body of Christ is a family. And so I definitely think that's really interesting that you're able to have fun with it too, because we aren't meant to take ourselves seriously. Like God has a sense of humor. J.K. Chesterton writes like that too. And so I definitely think that's cool that that's a perspective that you're coming from and that it comes through in your work. So the three gifts that are given by the Celestials, it's manipulating heat and fire and energy and warmth, interacting with animals, and the last one is, I'm sorry, I'm drawing a blank.
That's okay. Like inanimate objects, like
Interacting with objects,
rock.
yes. The
Yeah.
one
Okay.
character has can work with wood, for example,
Mhm.
or with bone. And so, if you were in Mothmar, which of these three gifts would you want to have?
Hate this question because I feel
Sorry.
like no, it's good. I like I don't really hate it. I feel like Tala is the coolest one, like manipulation of the animals. I think that one's the coolest one, but I'm not a huge animal person personally. So I feel like that wouldn't be very useful in my everyday life, right?
Mhm.
And then I'm like, ooh, Farah would make like that would make me feel like a wizard from Harry Potter or something. Like I could like move things and do stuff like that. And then I was like, but you know what? Ultimately, I think I would pick height because the ability to heal people or like create heat, I don't know. I just think, and I think too, like in the bones of my book, I've made it so that height is seen as the most valued gift. And so, and like the people who are height are treated differently. Like there is, I mean, not that they should be, but like that's what happens. So I feel like it has become the most important in my mind too. So I'm like, I just gotta pick height.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. The three gifts remind me a lot of, and then the idea of being like giftless, like I think it's Ruana is the term for it, that Solana doesn't have a gift for, and so that's something that she struggles with. Reminded me a lot of like the world of Avatar: The Last Airbender, where like these different categories, and then there's the non-benders and stuff. And the politics of that were really interesting, and I'm curious to see how you continue to explore that, because that was one of the things that I really picked up switching between Pala's chapters and Solyana's chapters, is how they both deal with the gifts and what they're expected to do in this culture and what's valued and finding their own worth in that.
Yeah, actually, when I was writing Daughter of the Sun, my husband and I were watching through Avatar: The Last Airbender, and so that's a lot of inspiration was drawn from that world, 100%.
Mhm. It's one of my favorite TV shows. And so I definitely, it's a good comp title. Like it's obviously not the same. It doesn't deal with all the
Yeah.
same, but it's still a very cool like inspiration all the same. Like you were talking about Mad Max earlier, or Dune. Um, it's more than the sum of its parts.
Yeah.
So, were there any like headcanons or little details that didn't make it into the final cut of the book? This is if they're not spoilers, but
Yeah.
I know you said you're a plantser. Was there anything that you wrote a scene and then had to like shuffle it around or move it or cut it?
Yeah. So actually, Daughter of the Sun used to be 150,000 words, and now it sits at about 91,000. So I cut almost 60,000 words from the first book. Yeah, basically a whole book I cut out, which thankfully, so Paula's story had just gone on farther. So her story actually, I just chopped and moved to the second book and then restructured it.
That's nice that you
So
were able to reuse it.
yes, so that made writing the second one a lot faster for Paula. And then, but for Solyana, she had to get from point A to point B. So I went meticulously through every single scene, every single line. There was actually a ton more dialogue from Jonas. He was in it a lot more, but I had to give those lines to Priestess Avi instead, because at that point, she was more important for us to get to know and to reveal information from. Uh, there is a scene that I wish I could have kept in there, but I didn't. And maybe I'll release it as like a bonus chapter one day. But essentially, because it does come into play for like the third book, kind of. um, so essentially, there was, and you kind of get this in the beginning of the book when Solyana is walking to her stada, right? She's going to the high task to find out if for sure she has no gifts. And she passes this tea stall, and Thena is working the tea stall, and she gives her some saxifrage tea that Solyana loves. And she starts saying, like, I am a Rana too. There is, and she's kind of talking to her mano y mano, like trying to get on her good side, like, hey, like you're one of us now. And Solyana's kind of uncomfortable with that because her whole family has gifts, right? So I actually have a whole scene where Solyana meets Athena's niece and ends up going with her to a meeting. It's basically an underground meeting of Rana that they all kind of get together and talk about the future of Mothmar and what they want to do. But Solyana's father, who's the chief, doesn't know about it. So it's kind of this secret
Ooh.
like coup that is possibly happening.
Ooh.
Yeah. And so yeah, so that whole scene, I cut that all out. I got rid of that whole line. It's kind of still in there a little bit, this kind of thread of like, what are they doing? Why are the Rana kind of rebelling? And it comes to a head after that second blizzard when they're all in the Temple Celestial
Yes.
together and they're arguing, right? About so that is kind of the crux of it, that other scene would have happened before. So anyway, that's the only one that I wish I could have kept
That's
her.
really interesting. Political intrigue is very, because then Solana would be torn between her, like, these are the people that get me. This is like something that could be a found family. These are the people who understand me. And then, but I'm loyal to my family and to my father and to, the people who have raised me and also care about me. And so
Yeah.
that would have been a very interesting way to pull her in very different directions. I understand why you would have to cut it, both for the time and for the themes of the story, but that's very interesting. I'd be curious to read that as a deleted scene later
Yeah.
if you do ever share it. So you self-published this book. What were some of your challenges and triumphs with like getting this book into the world?
I think just figuring out how to do it, like self-publishing, I feel like is a really there's so much information out there, so much, but it's almost too much. So there's no one-stop shop where you can just learn everything that you want to know about self-publishing and move on. And everyone does it differently. There are so many different ways to self-publish that it makes it hard to know what you can do and how you can do it. Um, I think like the hardest part for me was probably understanding my timeline, just not knowing how long everything would take to be able to give someone a release date or say like yeah, or like when to hire my cover designer, or when all these things, or how long an edit would take, how many times should I have it beta read or alpha read or edited or revised or rewritten. So I think all of that is just something that I've grown in now that I've come out with two books, as I have them both here. But now that I have both of them out, I can just like I feel like with every book, I'm just getting more and more confident with like, okay, I know it's going to at least take me this long, but I'm going to give myself an extra 2 weeks on top of it. Or I know this is going to take you this long. I'm going to give myself an extra month on top of this because it just takes so much longer than you think.
I remember going through that when the first time I gave Runaways to beta readers. I was like, "Hi, could you finish this in like 3 months?" And then it was like 6 months later, and I'm like, "Can I please have my book back? Can I please have my
Oh
book
my
back? I'd
gosh.
like comments, please." And having to bother people for that was really hard because I was a busy college student. Like I know as well as anybody how things pile up and get crazy, but at the same time, you're
Yeah.
impatient. You want to move on to the next steps. And so that was really hard for me to manage. And I hope I get better at that as I go through the rest of the publishing steps. But yeah, it's very time consuming. So I'm glad
Yeah.
that you've been able to learn from that as you put out Children of the Earth and go through with the rest of the steps.
Yeah. 100%.
So I always like to ask people who I interview like a freebie question. Is there anything that you wanted to mention about these books that you've just been dying to talk about that I haven't asked you yet? Go ahead and feel free to ramble about it now.
Oh man, I don't think I have anything. I'm just really excited for everyone to read the second book. Like, I know I should probably limit my arcs because I have arc applications open right now. I should
Mhm.
probably limit them a little bit, but part of me is just like, everyone just take it. Just take it. I want everyone to read it right now. So that's gonna be the hard part for me is being like, no, Amanda, calm it down. Just yeah.
That makes sense. Yeah. So I guess the next question is, what are you working on next? I guess the third book in the trilogy. And then where can people find you, your books, the ARC signups if they want to do that, where to buy your books? Go ahead, and I will make a transcript of this conversation and I'll include links to everything.
Perfect, thank you. Currently what I'm working on actually is my short story for Gunner. So if you were a part of my Kickstarter in May, one of the stretch goals that we had was that I was going to write a short story for Gunner years in the future. So Gunner is a little bit older. He's 39, and he is the priest of the temple of his village, and some really crazy stuff starts happening, and he has to deal with the consequences. Um, yeah, he definitely harbors some guilt from when he was a kid, and fibbed a little bit on the prophecy. So yeah, so I'm working on that, and that's been really good. I I had a first rough draft, handed it over to my editor. She slashed it to pieces, so now we're we're building it back up together, and she's using it as like an opportunity to teach me more about craft, and she's really good at all that, so I'm thankful for it. So I'm hoping once I'm done with that short story, I will have a little bit more skill in my arsenal to be able to tackle book three, and hopefully it will not take as many drafts as the first two. We'll see. But I have it about a third of the way outlined already for book three. And then my husband and I have had some really good brainstorming sessions on what exactly needs to happen. So, and then I'm on Instagram a lot. So you can find me there at author Amanda Auler. And my links in my bio are all where you can find my books. So currently they're on like Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Target.com, Walmart.com, that kind of thing. And then I also have, um, oh, I have an audiobook up. Like you said, you listen to the audiobook that's on Audible right now. That's soon going to be on other places. So I'm actually, my 90 days on Audible is running out, and I will then email them to get my contract back. So I'll be able to spread that a little bit wider so people can get
That's
it at their
awesome.
libraries. Yeah. So that's a big deal to me. I really want people to be able to get it at libraries. And yeah, I think that's about it. Going good.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mentioned this to you before in our personal conversations when you first gave me the audiobook, but I work in a lab, and so
Yeah.
I cannot read physical books. I have a whole bookshelf over here full of paperbacks, and I just do not have the time to read paperbacks, and I can't sit down and like leaf through pages, but I have 8 hours to kill every day working with my hands where I can have an earbud in and listen to books. And so I think I have like 4 checked out from the local library right now on like the Libby app, where
Yes.
it's like
Love
the
Libby.
e-audiobooks, and they are the saving grace that gets me through the workday. And like I said, I read yours in one day flat, like
That's amazing.
1.25 speed, and like, okay,
Wow.
I'm getting through this. And I even finished listening to it after I got home from work. So yeah, I really appreciate that you're making that available to people, because it's a really great accessibility tool too. Like my sister has dyslexia, and so she does a lot of audiobooks, and she loves reading, but that's helps it make it a lot more accessible for her. So it's something not a lot of indie authors do, but I'm really glad that you're making that available to people, because it's the only reason I was able to read your book, where I've been
Yeah.
watching your Instagram for a while and I'm like, wow, this looks really cool. Either I will read it in 10 years or not at all, or I could read it tomorrow if it was an audio. So
Yes. I do have to say, in indie authors' defense, it's a lot harder to do it in libraries and things like that, simply because you get paid more when it's just an Audible.
I can believe
Um,
that.
and
Yeah.
you get a lot less of the percentage if you have it spread out in different places. But the hope is that it will just get spread out in enough places to make up for
Mhm.
it not being solely
Yeah.
on Audible.
Everything that indie authors do is usually driven by the industry trying to screw them over in one way or another. It's just
Yeah.
there's not a lot of good options. So
Yeah.
I wish you all the best of luck with all of that. And thank you so much for spending the time to talk with me today. I know you're very busy, so I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Ada. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a good day.
You too.